Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming and joining what is going to be a really interesting panel on global risk, of which there is, unfortunately, a surplus in the world today. We are going to cover as much as we can in the 1 hour we have. I suspect we could take 3 times that time if we needed to, but I'm going to dive right in. Some very brief introductions for people who don't really need them. Starting here on the end to my left, General Wesley Clark is former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, was a 2004 Democratic candidate for president, and is now chairman of the investment bank Envera. Next to me on my left is Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican from South Carolina, a member of the Armed Services Committee, among others. And Senator Graham, last I checked, you said there was a 91% chance you would seek the Republican nomination for president.
92.
Okay. We'll see if that number goes up during the panel. To my right, of course, is Tony Blair, former Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, who needs no further introduction. And to his right is Yasuhide Nakayama, State Minister for Foreign Affairs of Japan, a member of Japan's parliament representing the Liberal Democratic Party. Thank you all for joining us. Let's dive right in. Mr. Blair, looking at the Middle East and North Africa, by my count, we have 3 failed states in Syria, Yemen, and Libya. All of them arguably are in a state of civil war. And in every case, we see radicalism, ISIS and Al-Qaeda. It actually looks to me like the region is in worse shape than it was a decade ago. My question to you is this going to get worse before it gets better? And what can the outside world constructively do to prevent total disaster in the region?
First of all, thank you very much indeed for having me back at the global conference.
Good morning.
It's always a slightly heavy conversation to begin with. I think it's going to remain immensely difficult and challenging for a long period of time. But let's try and take a step back and put the big picture. What is happening across the Middle East and North Africa is that a combination of a toxic mix of bad politics and bad religion has created a situation in which, as dictatorships have been cast off, there has not been the institutional capacity in states to be able to govern themselves and to reach a new dispensation for government in their countries. And as a result of that, the broad wishes of the people of these countries, which is probably, by the way, for decent government, for rule-based economies, for tolerant societies, all of those wishes and ambitions have been squashed underneath this immense pressure of extremism, born out of a perversion of religion, and then combining with the fact that there is, as I say, situations of instability, insufficient capacity within institutions to govern. Now, I think there are 3 things that are relevant in the big picture for us to consider. The first is this, because each one of them requires, in a sense, a decision about where we go. The first is this: when you're facing groups like ISIS, al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, none of these groups are capable of really being negotiated with. You have to defeat them. So the first thing is that we have to have the ability and the capacity from a military standpoint, and utilizing the lessons that we've learned over the last 10, 15 years to go and defeat them wherever they are. And that there are a whole series of questions that come from that we've got to be prepared to answer, and we've got to have the will and the commitment to go and fight these people where they exist. And that will sometimes be done in alliance with others, and sometimes we'll have to do it on our own. The second thing is this: my view is that the problem is not simply countering violent extremism, it's countering extremism. That the violence is born out of an ideology, right? And you can see this ideology represented by the theocracy in Iran on the Shia side. You can see it represented by various groups, Muslim Brotherhood and others on the Sunni side. This ideology, that is an ideology that seeks to suborn the whole of society to a particular view of religion, that ideology has to be countered. And the work that my foundation does now in countering extremism targets specifically this issue We've got to understand that around the world today, not just in the Middle East and North Africa, but in Asia, in Central Asia, in the Far East, even in our own societies within Europe, there is an ideology of extremism that is being taught and promulgated and taught to millions of young people day in, day out. And my point is very simple. If we want to deal with this extremism issue, yes, you have to tackle the immediate, but you have to tackle the root cause, which is the education of a warped sort given to millions of young people. And what, to my mind, is absolutely crazy about the world today is that we spend billions of dollars on security relationships when inside the education systems of some of these countries, we are incubating the very problem that we then end up having to defeat. And what we should have is, in my view, a global compact on education, which all countries agree to, where they accept it as part of your global responsibility as a nation to promote religious tolerance within your education systems and root out religious prejudice. Because the world today belongs to the people who are able to traverse the barriers of culture and faith and race and nation. And that essential campaign for the open-minded view of the world is what we need to have right at the heart of our policy long term. And then the third element is, what does the West do? The West, and here's the one piece of good news in all this extremism. In each of these countries, there are people who want the same things that we want. And as I said earlier, I actually think they're a majority. And I would like to see us in the West, yes, we should learn all of the lessons of the last 10, 15 years, but we have to recognize this is a struggle in which our own interests are intimately connected, and we need the decent and open-minded people to succeed. They won't succeed unless we're prepared to commit to stand alongside them.
Thank you. Keeping with the theme of dealing with radicalism, I want to turn to the State Minister. You had the extraordinary experience of negotiating or trying to negotiate. I think you learned in a very difficult way what Mr. Blair just said, which is that these are people you cannot negotiate with. You were negotiating with ISIS in Jordan, representing the Japanese government during the crisis in January when ISIS held 2 Japanese hostages. Unfortunately, both of them were executed, teaching us a hard lesson about the ability to deal with ISIS. Can you tell us, State Minister, what did you learn about this new form of terrorism in your interactions? And tell us very briefly, who were you communicating with, and what was that like?
First of all, I'd like to thank you for Milken Institute, and thank you very much for inviting me here, and especially my friend Kotaro Tamura, who is a professor of Lee Kuan University, and he introduced me here. And one thing I'd like to tell you, I learned English myself from Hollywood movies called Beverly Hills Cop 1. So my English skill is not so good, so I excuse, and I say I'm sorry fast. Okay.
No need to apologize.
Arigato. But I do my best effort here.
Thank you.
So first of all, 2001, we had very big effect terrorism called 9/11, and Osama bin Laden did that kind of things, horrible things. After Osama bin Laden type of terrorism, what's the difference compared to ISIS? Is terrorists meet high technology. And this time, ISIS using internet communications tools as a tools. So for example, one of the hostage was Mr. Goto, who is a journalist, but the IS killed the journalist. Why? Because now it's a different compared to 70 years ago type of war. We had a war against US, Japan, of course, Great Britain. And if I make sounds of 70 years ago war, sounds like this. But now, only one click. One click can destroy everything. So what's the difference? I mean, the the speed, no limit, no border. So terrorists, even one terrorist can fight against a nation. 70 years ago, the warfare, it's a nation versus nation. So this is a big difference between the warfare, the type, compared to the old one. And so we the Japan, negotiate with IS this time. But it was very difficult because I have no card, nothing. See, you know, the G8, the big countries, we gathered and we decided we never pay the ransom for the victim. We never negotiating with terrorists directly. So with these rules, it's difficult to negotiate with no rules people. We play chess each other. If you are a terrorist, I'm a good guy. Play chess. I have a rule. You have no rule. Then you can take king and queen immediately. So this is the game against the terrorist right now. And I really thank to King Abdullah of Jordanian government. Jordanian government and King Abdullah really cooperate us really strongly, including intelligence, the group called GID. And in the Middle East, of course, Israeli Mossad and also the other maybe intelligence, but the most cooperative agency at that time was the GID. And one thing I can tell you, if the Jordanian king said yes, other people say yes always to me. So it's a negotiating between the King Abdullah and I was the most important meeting at that time. And through the government of Jordan, we can talk as like kind of like a brother country to country. Mm-hmm. And so we stand each other. And I really express my condolences to Muaz al-Kasasbe, who is a pilot captured 24th of December. And
unfortunately, it seems that the lesson was proven that you can't negotiate with these terrorists in the end.
They are only a killer. They are Daesh.
Yeah.
They are not a human being.
Because we have so much to cover in a short time, I want to change gears a little bit. Thank you, State Minister.
Thank you.
Senator Graham, the U.S. Senate this week will consider legislation regarding the president's negotiations with Iran over its nuclear program. I know this is a subject you have strong feelings about. Tell us what you expect the Senate to do, but more broadly, the subject here is global risk. You know, the president says if we don't do a deal with Iran, if there is no deal, the negotiations break down. That is immensely risky, that could lead us to war. But I understand your position to be that the deal itself is very risky. So talk about that.
Well, the first thing, to our Japanese friend, I understand you better than the Prime Minister.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Is it just
it's the sound effects.
It's just me, or does he talk funny? The Prime Minister. So, what were we talking about? Iran.
Iran
okay.
nuclear.
Number one, the Senate will overwhelmingly approve the Corker legislation this week that basically says for the president to lift congressional sanctions that we created, he's going to have to come to Congress to get our permission, which makes eminent sense to me, and I think there'll be a lot of bipartisan support. As to a deal versus no deal, the president will say if we don't get a deal, that's our last best chance to avoid a war. The consequences of a bad deal worry me more because I don't think that's your choice. If you lock in a bad deal, and the bad deal would be if the Arabs, Sunni Arabs, feel like they need a nuclear capability to counter the Shia Persians, the worst possible outcome in Iranian nuclear negotiations is to turn the Mideast into a nuclear arms race. So I'm convinced that if we give the Iranians too much capacity, which nobody trusts, oh, by the way, how many people here believe they've been trying to build a nuclear weapons program, not a nuclear power plant? Those that didn't raise your hand, you should not be allowed to drive in California. So you got to know who you're dealing with. These guys lie and cheat, and they really want a nuclear weapon to maintain their regime because they'll believe nobody will bother them in the future, and that'll be a trump card, and they're probably right about that. But the Sunni Arabs, unlike our friends in Japan and South Korea, are not going to tolerate a nuclear-armed Iran. North Korea went nuclear, but Japan and South Korea thus far have felt like they don't need to go down that road. The Sunni Arabs will. So what is a good deal? A good deal that would be one to end the nuclear ambitions of the Iranians so they can have a small enrichment program, save face, and have a nuclear power program that can never be used to make a nuclear weapon. A bad deal would be too much capacity in the hands of the Iranians so the Arabs feel like they need to match it and then some. At the end of the day, here's what I think, that a good deal is going to be understood by Israel and the Arabs, and if the Arabs and the Israelis say this is too much capacity, then it'll be hard to get it through the Senate. And so I love a good deal, and I'll outline very quickly what I think a good deal would look like. Anytime, anywhere inspections, including military facilities. If you do lift the inspection regime 10 years from now, 15 years from now, whatever the date might be, there's a certification that the regime at that time and that place is no longer a state sponsor of terrorism. I don't think that's an unreasonable request to make. And they don't get a dime under sanctions relief until they start complying with the inspection regime, because here's my biggest fear. They won't take the $50 to $100 billion and build hospitals and schools with it. They will put it in their war machine. So bottom line, Congress is going to insist on reviewing a deal. A bad deal would be one that leads to a nuclear arms race in the Mideast, and I hope that's not the kind of deal we get.
Thank you.
General Clark, I wonder if you want to pick up from that and elaborate on the question of what a deal could mean for Iran's role in the region. One school of thought you hear from the administration is that a deal would put wind in the sails of the reformers like Rouhani, moderate the regime, open it up, perhaps be the first step towards a new relationship with the United States and the West. Another school of thought is that this infusion of money and economic activity will go to Iranian hegemonic activities in the region, go to Hezbollah, allow Iran to take sides in civil wars in the region. How do you see it playing out?
It's a good question, but I've got to be careful how I answer because I'm afraid Senator Graham might steal my driver's license or have I say the wrong thing here. But I'm very concerned about the agreement, but let's put it in the larger context. Iran and Turkey are facing off in a competition to see who can control the Middle East.
That's right.
Under President Erdogan, there's a longing for the glories of the Ottoman Empire, for the real caliphate, for the great legacy of Turkish domination over the entire region, including Saudi Arabia. And as Iran becomes more powerful and proves itself through its outreach into Lebanon and Syria and now into Yemen, it also sees the beckoning of empire. And so you have to look at the nuclear agreement as just one step in this. So I think Senator Graham's very right to be concerned about starting a nuclear arms race in the region. But I think that regardless of how this agreement comes out, you're going to have the Persian-Turkish competition. Now, these nations are sly. They're clever. They're not like Americans. They don't like the American definition of war. I mean, in America, we think that, you know, it's either war or peace. We're either going to shake hands with you or we're going to drop a nuclear weapon on you and send in the Marines in the 101st. And in reality, this is armed struggle in this region for regional dominance. It's playing out through the terrorist organizations. ISIS, for example. When the United States says we're going to destroy ISIS, well, I don't think that's going to happen because ISIS is supported by certain countries in the region to wage war against other countries in the region. It's simply using terrorists and recruiting extremists, but it is an agent of governments. Now, it's an agent in the same way Frankenstein was created by human beings, so it has its own will and intent. In that context, then, what we've got to do is we've got to figure out now, in this window of time between the announcement of an agreement to agree and seeing the details, we've got to hope that Secretary Kerry and President Obama take heed of the concerns that have been raised all around the world about this agreement. It's not too late to stand up and demand the kind of details that would help us restrain the nuclear arms race. It may not be too late to try to do something more in terms of bringing Iran back in, but, and this is sort of my theme on this panel, I would just tell you that I think we're greatly underestimating geostrategic risk. The idea that this is going to, an agreement here is going to open up Iran, investment will pour in, these countries are going to really get along well. Well, yeah, investment will pour in, and Iran will use its wealth as it sees fit to, for self-aggrandizement. It will support Bashar al-Assad in Syria. It will develop deeper ties with Vladimir Putin in Russia. It will further squeeze the Saudi regimes through its efforts in Oman and Yemen. So there's no end to the conflict in this region. We're looking at decades of struggle, armed struggle, using the symbols of religion, going after the politics of identity, using the misshapen ambitions of misled young people who believe they can find heaven by killing innocent people. All of that is in play. This nuclear agreement is just a small part of it, and we have to be wise enough to use the agreement to not only deal with the nuclear issue, but try to address and shape the larger issues. This is not a region you can handle by U.S. forces. Right. We put our armed forces in. In my view, it's the biggest single strategic error ever made by the United States of America. Saddam Hussein said he would, if we attacked, we would open up the gates of hell. Well, since he told us 15 years earlier we were going to have the mother of all battles, and it only lasted 4 days, we didn't believe him when he said the gates of hell. But when you look at the consequences of the end of Baathism, the opening of Iran, the clash that's going on, the rise of sectarianism and civil war, you realize these are issues that are much deeper, much stronger, and much more powerful than we can resolve with a 100,000-man troop.
To that point, and on the question of diplomacy, Mr. Blair, I know you spend quite a lot of time now trying to get what's left of the Middle East peace process back on track. And there was a time, I think if we were sitting here 10, 15 years ago, when we talked about the roots of these problems, we would keep coming back to this idea of some solution between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Now it seems that there are so much more happening. Perhaps that alone would only be a small step. But I guess my question to you is, does this remain fundamental to stability in the region? And quite simply, isn't the peace process dead at this point? It often seems that way from the US.
It remains fundamentally important. And it remains fundamentally important in my view, and you know, I'm out there in the Middle East probably twice a month now. So I'm looking at it and studying it the whole time. It remains important for a reason I think is relevant to the broader conversation. See, the one thing that I mean, I agree it's going to be a long generational struggle, this process of change. But I do think we are looking at the Middle East wrestling with the demons that at some point was always going to have to wrestle with. And the one thing I personally think is the right way of looking at the Middle East today is, yes, you can look at it as a power struggle between interests. I think it's also important to look at it as a struggle between different sets of values. Because the truth is, if you take a country like Egypt, where the Muslim Brotherhood came to power, and then, you know, like it or don't like it, but 20 million people come out in the street and put them out. And now the new president there is having to try and plan a way forward for the future. The truth is, the only recourse for a country like Egypt is to reform its economy, to reform its education system, to open up to the world, and to encourage a good relationship with all of its neighbors, including Israel. Right? So, in the end, what's going to happen in the Middle East, if there's to be any future, because you're going to remain with Sunni and Shia and different trends within those religions, is people are either going to have to take a basically open-minded view of the world or not. Now, into that, as it were, cauldron comes the Israeli-Palestinian issue. And why is that so important in my view? It's important because, for all the obvious reasons, it's important for another reason, which is at the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian issue, again in my view, is not simply a debate about where do you put the borders. You know, how do you make the territories, how do you divide up the territories, or how do you deal with the issue of Jerusalem? It's also a fundamental issue of cultural acceptance. You know, in a tiny strip of land, are two peoples prepared to live side by side in peace, recognizing that they come from different cultures and different faiths? So that's why, for me, it remains fundamentally important. And by the way, I don't think it's dead. I think in the end, there is only one solution, which is to have two states for two peoples. But I think the key to resolving the Israeli-Palestinian issue today lies in the region. Right? And the one thing I would say that is fascinating, I just put this thought out there, in my experience over the last months particularly, you will have the same conversation in Jerusalem and the same conversation in most of the Arab capitals. And what is the worry that all of those governments have? The worry is extremism. The worry is the people who want, by instability, chaos, and terrorism, to prevent that cultural acceptance. Now, many of these countries in the Middle East have got to go through their own big processes of reform. That's true. But I just say to you, for the first time, what I'm finding in the Middle East is that there are people within those Middle Eastern countries, within Islam, who are prepared to stand up and say, we've got to go in a different direction for the future. And that's the one thing that gives me hope. And if you could resolve the Israeli-Palestinian issue, think what a huge boost you would give to the forces of cultural acceptance and what a big blow you would deal to the forces of extremism. That's why it remains important.
Senator Graham, do you think the peace process is dead? And how would you talk about it if you do run for president? There's a conservative view that the Obama administration has pressured Israel more than is appropriate to reach some kind of a deal. Do you agree with that assessment? Do you think the peace process is still a top priority, or has the larger problem of extremism and some of the other conflicts that have arisen taken a higher priority?
Well, as to the Prime Minister, he is, and John Kerry, quite frankly, worked really hard to try to get the sides in a good spot to move forward. And you've got a divided Palestinian community. You know, you got Gaza Strip under Hamas's control, and you got the West Bank where their economy is doing a bit better and the security forces are more reliable. And I don't know how you put the Palestinian people back together again, but that'd be a good start from a negotiating point of view. I mean, you got 3 negotiations going on, I guess. So a group of Palestinians you could live in peace with represents the majority, and you got a group that want to drive you in the sea. So that's pretty tough for Israel. But let me just say this. If you had a clever president, about 5'7", there's a historic moment shaping up in the Mideast where the Arabs and the Israelis are aligned unlike any time I've ever seen. They have 2 common threats. ISIL will cut their throat before they will cut ours. All of these leaders in the Mideast are in harm's way from radical Islamic groups. All these Al guys, anything named Al over there you need to watch for. So the king of Jordan, the king of Saudi Arabia, all of the Gulf Arab states, ISIL hates them as much as they hate you. And they're beginning to realize that, General Clark, that they've been feeding the beast. And the idea of a Shia-Persian march throughout the Mideast scares the heck out of these guys. So you've got 2 common enemies to the Arabs and the Israelis. Radical Islamists, one Shia, one Persian, with the capability to take down the region. Come together, start in Syria. If I were president, the first guy I'd go after would be Assad. We drew the red line and nothing happened. That emboldened Putin and emboldened the Iranians and emboldened everybody. You'll never have an Arab army go into Syria just to fight ISIL. They're not going to give Syria over to Assad, who's Iran's puppet. They want him gone. It's in our interest that he goes. Now, all hell follows when he leaves, but all hell is there anyway. So what I think is there's a unique opportunity to have an Arab-Israeli engagement to contain radical Islam on both sides that could translate to a meaningful dialogue that one day could translate to restarting the peace process anew.
Right.
El-Sisi is an interesting cat. The Mubarak model won't work. To all of my friends on the Republican side who yearn for Gaddafi and Saddam to come back, you got to remember, we're Americans. I'm never going to ask a young Muslim, Arab, to live in a dictatorship for my convenience anymore. I'm not going to ask your kids to live in a dictatorship for my convenience. There's two things going on in the Mideast. There's a fight for the heart and soul of Islam, and I'm going to take sides. I'm going to take sides with those who won't kill us. That's most. There's a fight for how you govern the Mideast. I'm taking sides with young people who are upset about the fact they're living in a country where a few get everything, and on the day they're born, their fate's determined. And in the middle is the vacuum created by American lack of leadership that radicals have filled. So how do you start the peace process? You go to the Arabs and say, listen, we'll be with you in Syria. We'll integrate our forces. You're going to have the main battle force, but we're going to give capability to supplement your forces so we take ISIL and Assad down. But here's what we want in return. Stop paying these guys. Cut off their money. And oh, by the way, let women drive. And sit down with the Israelis and see if we can patch this up. El-Sisi's done a good job in closing the tunnels. So every mistake has a consequence. We've made plenty on the Republican and Democratic side, but I would say this. There's a historic opportunity here to create an alliance between former foes that could be transformational and jumpstart the peace process unlike any time I've seen. Tell Hamas, knock it off, no more Arab support.
Thank you. I want to change gears in just a second, go to Europe, and I have a question for General Clark that I've been looking forward to hearing from him on. But I just want to give the State Minister an opportunity to add any concluding thoughts, particularly on the question of what more we can be doing to fight these extremists that you've had firsthand encounter with. You mentioned their use of information technology. Do you think the world has caught up to that, has a strategy to deal with it? Do you have any recommendations?
I think, of course, we have to strong ties. We have to harmonize strongly against ISIS or other extremism. And the important thing is, how do you say, sorry, I forget English so much. And how do you say?
Well, an alliance, a strong alliance between, I mean, does Japan have a role to play with the West in this?
All right. Okay, for example, like you're talking about Iran, right? And I saw one day on the news some drone or unmanned vehicle flew over the sky, above the sky of Iran, and it dropped. And they took the body, and they copied it, and they already made a really high-tech drone, Iran version. And one thing I worry, I have a neighbor friend country called North Korea. If the North Korea, Iranian, and also Pakistan, if this triangle has the same kind of level of technology liaison, then it will be our very big fear. Yeah. I live in Osaka city, which is the second largest city in my country. In my house, even I sleep, even I eat, even I take in shower. Only 7 minutes, if the Kim Jong-il pushes the button, the missile reach to my country. So now the Prime Minister Abe visiting Washington, D.C.?
I'd like you to hold that thought because we'll come to Asia in a minute.
Right.
Thank you for the contribution, but we'll come back to that subject because there's a lot to say about it. General Clark, I want to ask you what I think is one of the hardest foreign policy questions in Washington right now, which is how to think about the NATO Article 5, the self-defense provision, or the collective defense, provision of the NATO alliance in the context of what Vladimir Putin has been doing in Ukraine. And in particular, the scenario which I've seen firsthand stump a couple of foreign policy advisors, very senior foreign policy advisors to Republican candidates, who I thought didn't quite have an answer that I could summarize for you, is what happens if there is a sort of plausibly deniable Russian intervention in the Baltic countries, which are NATO members, in which Vladimir Putin stirs up ethnic Russians, and you have in essence a replay of what's been happening in eastern Ukraine. It's maybe not a full-fledged invasion, but it's pretty clear to anyone who can drive a car, as the senator might say, that Vladimir Putin is staging something like that is tantamount to an invasion. Does that trigger Article 5 of the NATO treaty? Does that drag the United States in? Can you see a plausible scenario where there's a military conflict between American forces and Russian forces in the next several years?
Yeah, well, the direct answer to your question is if there's an attack on one nation that's a member of NATO, it's viewed under Article 5 as an attack on all. That's the treaty obligation. Now, we brought these Baltic nations in 2002. I was very happy that we did that. It was done in a big swoop, and it was done without a whole lot of debate in the United States. It sort of got rolled in after 9/11. And they wanted to be in because they've seen the movie before. They know Russia's going to come back. So they know Russia's clever. Russia's already in there. Russia's already undercutting their will to resist. And it very likely could start exactly as you suggest. There'll be a demonstration. A statue is taken down in Latvia. They don't like that. And Russian citizens of Latvia protest this. And then they say, well, the decision was made in the administration building. Let's take over the administration building. But some of the people who take over the administration building are in camouflage, green camouflage. And they're carrying cases.
Little green men, weren't they?
They're green men.
Yeah.
They're little stick men who actually belong to Russian special forces. And when you go to evict them, they don't get evicted because ordinary police don't do well against Delta Force or the Russian equivalent. So NATO has to think this thing through. You've got to have in the reaction force not a bunch of armored cavalry guys who can parade through Eastern Europe, although I'm all in favor of that right now. You need some special forces people on the sort of 2-hour alert who can handle this, backed up by the equivalent of the Italian Carabinieri, the military police. And you need to have rehearsed and gone through in NATO exercises the kind of automatic triggers that will let our political leaders quickly come to terms with the legal issues that will bring this forward. If we don't have this rehearsed, if it's not done in NATO planning and so forth, there'll be lots of confusion and questioning, are these really Russians and so forth, and can't we do something? When I listen to people talk about Ukraine today, and I hear this from many of my European friends, I feel like I'm sitting at the League of Nations in 1935 when Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia was asking for assistance against the Italian invasion of Abyssinia, and people couldn't make up their mind what to do. They did nothing. And today I hear people talking about President Poroshenko, who's trying to hold Ukraine together in the face of Russian aggression, with 9,000 Russian troops inside Ukraine, 55,000 on the border. It's 21st century warfare with 3 levels of UAVs, massive jamming, tanks that we don't have any comparable equipment for. Our anti-armor equipment, Lindsay, doesn't go through their armor. And we need a real wake-up call to get us back to 21st century warfare where the Russians are today. And I hear people talk about this as, well, we have to give Vladimir Putin a way out. He's such a nice man, and he really just got trapped into this by the evil people behind him, and if he doesn't look really tough, maybe he'll be overthrown. No, Vladimir Putin is right today, and Russia is right today, where someone like Adolf Hitler was in 1936. Hitler reoccupied the Rhineland, and if Britain and France and the United States had followed the dictates of the Versailles Treaty, he would never have gotten away with it, and maybe World War II would have been averted. Putin has crossed the greatest red line in post-World War II international diplomacy. He has invaded another country and seized its territory by force. And even though Ukraine's not a member of NATO, this has enormous implications for NATO and European security. Now, where we are, and I just want to say this because I'm saying that we in this business community are not understanding geostrategic risk. Right now, Angela Merkel and the President of France, Mr. Hollande, are standing up for the Minsk II agreement. But the Minsk II agreement is not being implemented. The Russian forces have the densest air defense array ever seen in modern Europe deployed in eastern Ukraine. They are training and organizing the so-called separatist units, which are 85% Russian anyway, and they're building the capacity for a third wave of Russian attack. Crimea is not economically sustainable without a land bridge connecting it through Ukraine. So we've got major forces moving. This is so urgent for NATO to come to terms with this.
Well, and another really hard question is not just for NATO writ large, but for Washington, right now for President Obama. Senator Graham, I want to ask you about another really interesting policy debate, which is, should we be sending lethal arms to the Ukrainians? There's a school of thought that, for instance, you could send Javelin anti-tank missiles, which you could ostensibly call defensive, but I think Putin would probably see them as offensive. And I've had people in the Obama administration tell me, and I think you understand the argument, that those missiles would raise the cost for Putin, and you would have, to put it bluntly, as they say, dead soldiers, more dead Russian soldiers coming back across the border. But my sense is that the president thinks that Putin will simply escalate, the conflict will get worse, could spill over, cross borders, and the Germans are adamantly opposed to it, Chancellor Angela Merkel, as you well know. So how to think about that, and where do you come down?
Well, there's bipartisan support overwhelming in nature for arming the Ukrainians. Remember the Budapest Memorandum, Protocol, whatever you call it?
Yep.
Even though they're not a member of NATO, in the 90s we said, if you'll give up your 2,000 plus nuclear weapons, we and Russia and everybody else will guarantee your sovereignty. If the rule of law means anything, it's been trampled on. And the consequence of letting someone do this, history tells you eventually where this goes. I'm not saying Putin's Hitler, but you're putting in motion very dangerous moments. So yes, I'd arm the Ukrainians. I'd create a cost-benefit equation Putin doesn't have today, but let's get right to the heart of the matter. Without American leadership, all this is not going to get fixed. I love our friends in Britain, but we got to lead. And NATO's response to a world on fire is to reduce our budgets. So here's the one thing you need to understand. For us to be effective against Putin, against China, against ISIL, against Iran, we're going to have the capability, the capacity, and the will. Under sequestration, by 2021, we're going to have the smallest army since 1940, the smallest navy since 1915. We're going to gut our intelligence community. The FBI and the CIA are losing people as I speak. This is insane. NATO nations who spend over 2% of GDP on defense is down to 5%. Our best friends in the world, the British, are debating how big their army and how capable their military should be. Why in the hell should Putin take anybody seriously? So here's what I would suggest. Buy back sequestration. Don't forgive the $540 billion. Put it back into defense and non-defense programs like the CDC and the NIH, which help us all, and go to a Simpson-Bowl plan to keep America from becoming Greece. A strong America means it's got to have a sound economy. 80 billion baby boomers are going to retire in the next 25 years, and we're going to wipe out Social Security and Medicare. If you don't do what Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did, then our best days are behind us. If you can't do what Reagan and what Simpson-Bowles calls for, you're not going to have the capability to defend this country. So here's my advice about Putin. Rebuild your military, get Republicans and Democrats acting like adults, not teenagers, and put this country on a sound economic footing and let the enemies of this world know America's back, and to our friends, you can count on us, starting with the Ukraine.
Thank you.
I like that.
Mr. Blair.
Good job.
I reckon that's just gone to 99%.
0.9.
Look, first of all, you've just got to be very clear about this. What has happened in Ukraine is the first time that territory has been taken like that since the end of the Second World War in Europe. I think there are a whole series of things that have just been talked about that need to be done in order to demonstrate our will and commitment, and the fact that we have alliances that we're going to adhere to, and all of that I agree with. I just want to make one point, which is actually about Europe. Europe's also got to understand it's got a responsibility to deal with this issue properly and seriously and strongly. And the fact is, you know, one of the things that always troubles me about the world is when America and Europe are not standing together clearly and firmly in defense of the values they believe in. The world then becomes a less safe place, and you feel this wherever you go. And the truth of the matter is we know what the strategy of President Putin is. I mean, I will say it's not very complicated. It's very simple. There is a desire, when he said that he thought that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the worst thing that had happened, that was what he meant, that's what he said, it's what he believes. Now, what is necessary, and this is why I feel a deep, you know, Americans can talk for America, but let me talk not just as someone who's British, but someone who also believes in a strong Europe. Europe's job is to be standing alongside America and facing up to this threat. And, you know, if we do not do that now and today and with urgency, it is going to get a lot worse in the time to come, and we will endanger a world order that we have put in place painfully with much sacrifice over many decades. But this is a moment to be strong, to be determined, and to recognize what our values are and be prepared to stand up for them.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, please.
What would the world be like if Putin had no gas? Or we didn't need his gas?
Yeah.
What would the world be like if fossil fuels were less influential than they are today? A rational energy policy where we find more here at home, buy oil for Canada because it makes sense, but eventually go to a lower carbon economy, could do more to reset our foreign policy than almost anything. So the reason the Germans and the French, I think, are being at best indifferent and naive is because they're locked into having to get their gas supply from a really bad guy. And Putin has got a pair of twos, and we got a full house. And I would make the purpose of my presidency, if I ran in one, to get an energy economy started in this country and throughout the world that would be less rewarding to thugs, dictators, and killers.
You wanted to add?
Yeah, I just want to add that there are actually measures that we could take over the next few years with an immediate impact around energy supply that would relieve some of that dependence on Russian energy, and that is undoubtedly a big dimension to this whole issue.
Yeah.
Well, can I just come in on this?
Sure, and then we're going to go to Asia,
I want to
but
just
please.
follow something Senator Graham said. I really think you're absolutely on the right track on this thing. We've got all the hydrocarbon resources we need to be totally energy independent and to export and lead the world forward and take over these energy markets that are existing right now. We also have the technology to move away from hydrocarbons as we have to do in the future. And we desperately need a national energy strategy. It's not about the oil industry. It's really about the future of the United States of America. We've got to, when President Eisenhower created the National Defense Complex, and everybody quotes him saying, beware of the military-industrial complex. But it gave us the technology we needed to be safe during the Cold War. We need a military industrial energy complex that will make us safe in the 21st century. The greatest commodity traded in the world is oil. It's done more to build civilization and conversely destabilize civilization over the last 40 years than any other single factor. And if we could get our Democrats and Republicans to work together and put together a sensible policy that would let us exploit hydrocarbons now, all out, take over these markets. $50, $60 oil, we're still making money on fracking. Do it.
Yep.
And then put the benchmarks in the 10-year, 15-year, 20-year period to move us entirely away from hydrocarbons. We would make the 21st century a whole lot safer for everyone.
And if we have time at the end, we'll come back to climate change, but I just want to make a few minutes to talk about Asia, where there's less violence and extremism than we see in some of these other regions, but a whole lot of risk. I mean, it may be the place where there's the most potential for mayhem, but fortunately so far not realized. And State Minister, your Prime Minister will be addressing the U.S. Congress on Wednesday. We're at the 70th anniversary of World War II. Clearly what looms so large in the Japan-Washington relationship, the Tokyo-Washington relationship right now, is China, and uncertainties about China's ambitions, its territorial claims, the tensions it's had with Japan over disputed territories, the air exclusion zone that really raised tensions a couple of years ago. Talk about, if you would, what is your assessment of China's intentions right now? What is the threat that you think it poses to stability and security in the region?
I think, thank you very much. I think, in fact, Prime Minister Abe visiting Washington, D.C. right now, but also he met with Xi Jinping in Bandung.
The Chinese president.
Exactly. And we talk a lot, and it's really a steady meeting. And then it's really kind of like a very peaceful meeting compared to military issue.
Compared to a couple of years ago, the relationship is better, you think?
Exactly. And also, but we also focus on their budget for military budget, defense budget for them. 8 years, the increasing 30 times the budget of
30 times.
Yes, armament and also the budget of defense of PLA. And also they are, maybe you already know, but they launched their satellite to space, and then they also destroy the satellite. They're already done. They already made the technology. Okay, so even we, the Japan and the US, strong alliance, and we a lot rely on the space field, using satellites. Without using satellite, we cannot launch a missile or move the soldiers. If the China PLA missile to our satellite, then what's happening?
So China's already preparing for space war.
I think.
Yeah.
And also we have to create the technology. Maybe we can launch not the big satellite, but the small satellite within 3 days. Not using a rocket, but using aviation, and then fly through over the space. And also, even China doing a cyber attack to all the world. So even the nation a country using a cyber technology to attacking the other state. So not just ISIS, not other terrorists, but so in that sense, we have to reset our mind, ourselves. There is a new type of war, or there is a semi-war already begin. And I attend the meeting of the Netherlands, which is a cyber conference, and I felt there is a new type of Cold War in cyberspace. In 1970s, 80s, we had a Cold War against Soviet Union and the US, and we are Western countryside. But now in the cyberspace, there is another Cold War begin. One is our side. Internet field is free, and it's very convenient to our marketing, economy, everything for their life. But China and Russia, they want to control more precisely as a human or citizen level. And that is a freedom world of internet, or it's a communist again.
Right. Right. So they're clamping down on their own societies, but they're also threatening other countries through cyber war.
Right.
And pardon me for interrupting, but because we're running out of time, I just want to use that to transition to North Korea, which has, according to the US government, conducted one of the most dramatic cyber attacks that we've seen against the Sony Corporation and all these emails that have come out. Very briefly, because we're running out of time, what is your assessment of North Korea's intentions? On some days it seems that Kim Jong-un is just kind of throwing tantrums for attention, and there are days where it looks as though he's capable of starting a cataclysmic conflict in the region. What do you think?
We have an abduction issue by North Korea. They take our citizens, they kidnapped, and we request them to release our hostages to North Korea. And also, I told about the missile issue, and also the Korea Peninsula is still Cold War is going on. Even in '89, the Berlin Wall has destroyed, but not 38-degree line. There still exist. So I personally want Great Britain, United States, or like a six-party talks, big countries, have to more focus on 38-degree line, how to make a real peace in the Korea Peninsula. And also...
you think real peace is possible? You think North Korea
I hope so. I hope so. And we have to, ask the North Korea, if you would like to open your door, which side are you going to? US side, democratic side, or the China communist side?
Yeah.
Which way you're going to choose? So we need the whip and candy, stick and carrot,
right?
To ask the real answer, because we don't know what the Kim Jong-un is thinking.
Right.
We just watch through the media, watch,
guessing at his intentions.
Embassies.
Forgive me for interrupting. We have 3 minutes for two subjects you could spend an hour each on. Very briefly, Mr. Blair, you said in 2013 there's no longer any serious doubt in the minds of serious people that global warming is a serious problem. Are there any serious solutions or any serious action being taken in your view? Are we doing enough?
There is an immense amount being done, and the solution very simply is the development of the science and technology for the future that allows us to consume sustainably. I mean, there's no way that these hundreds of millions of people who are emerging from poverty in Africa and India and China are not going to consume, right? They want a high standard of living. They want the same standards of living as us. The only answer to doing that is to be able to devise the solutions through science and technology that allow us to consume sustainably. My view, very simply, is the single most important thing of these Paris negotiations that will take place later this year is that instead of trying to make the best the enemy of the good, we get together the best possible deal we can at the moment, given the obligations that countries like the US, like China and others are entering into voluntarily, put that together and set a clear framework for the future where business and industry are able then to develop the science and technology that is going to allow us to consume in a different way. But this issue, it's a long-term issue. It remains absolutely fundamental and important for the future of the world.
Thank you. And a quick question for each of you before we wrap up. Senator, do you agree with the assessment that there's no longer any serious doubt in the minds of serious people that global warming is a serious problem?
Well, our friends in Britain are backing off their cap-and-trade system because it's driving up energy costs. I think greenhouse gas effect is real. I don't think it's the biggest threat to mankind. A nuke in the hands of the Ayatollahs trumps global warming. But having said that, I would like, as a Republican, to come up with an environmental policy that does what basically General Clark was talking about. Find as much fossil fuels within our reach from friendly sources as possible, but over time set emission standards that are pro-business in nature to move the economy one day from fossil fuel dependency to more cleaner sources of fuel. There's a place for coal, there's a place for gas. But from a Republican point of view, we need to be better stewards of God's planet. We need to have a rational environmental policy that's pro-business. from a Republican point of view, young people buy into the fact that the planet is heating up and man-made emissions are causing harm to the planet, to the American young people. If you're worried about the environment, count me in. My goal is to pass on to you a stronger economy, clean air and clean water, and create jobs in the process.
Thank you. And forgive me for turning this into a lightning round, but General Clark, we talked beforehand about systemic financial risk. I wish we had 5 minutes to devote to this. We're basically out of time, but you talked about a book you wrote that discusses this, and maybe you could give us the kind of elevator version of it.
Don't wait for the next war. We've created an awful lot of debt in the financial system. We really haven't addressed the systemic issues. There's still hundreds of trillions of dollars of derivatives out there based on interest rate. And when you ask the inside banking crowd, when are we going to really raise interest rates? When are we going to really get away from quantitative easing? The answer is never. And it's only a matter of time before some smart young hedge fund guy says, you know what, this debt's not sustainable. And it will spread like wildfire through the financial community, and we'll be back in some trouble again. We have to take our financial resources and invest in real projects. We need petrochemical projects. We need energy projects. We need infrastructure projects in highway, high-speed rail, aviation. These are things that create jobs. Derivative trading is great, and you can make a lot of money out of if you're a banker. I'm a banker. I know something about it. But it's not creating jobs and wealth in the real economy. If we're going to do what Prime Minister Blair says, we're going to have to use the financial system to fund and drive the economy, not the opposite. And what's happened is there's too much of the opposite right now. It takes from the real economy and plays the financial games. So don't wait for the next war. It's my book. Please read it.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We have to wrap up. I'm afraid we're out of time. The State Minister would just like to make a concluding remark. Very briefly, we're over time, please.
Okay, last word from me.
Yes.
And I am a Director General for Parliamentary Friendship League between Japan and Israel. And I went to Simon Wiesenthal Center yesterday, and I really touched by Anne Frank, what she said. She cannot say anything right now, so through me, I will send her messages. She said how wonderful it is that no one has to wait, but can start right now to gradually change the world. This is what she told to us.
That's a great note to close on. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it.